In today's video, we will be going through the 2013 American horror film The Banshee Chapter. Spoilers ahead, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like these. The movie is based on an experiment that the US government began in 1963 on American citizens, using chemical agents intended to induce mind control. The experiment is known as Project MK Ultra. Several video footages of prominent American figures are shown. A chemist, Dr. James Moore, admits that the use of the special chemical can cause changes in behavior and mental attitude. President Bill Clinton acknowledges certain government-sponsored unethical experiments were being performed in universities, hospitals, and military bases around the US. All people who were subjected to the chemical reported having experienced the same phenomenon. Under its influence, they were all reportedly greeted by a shady entity characterized as malignant and threatening. The scene then cuts away to camera footage of James Hirsch, a young aspiring novelist investigating the Project MK Ultra. With a friend, Rennie Segan, filming him, James injects the drug used in the experiments, dimethyltryptamine 19, DMT-19, to note its effects on subjects. The drug is extremely difficult to find, but apparently James acquired it through some friends in Colorado. Soon, bizarre music and voices begin to be intercepted on a nearby radio. James becomes extremely anxious, announcing that something is coming towards the house and that it wants to wear them. A large, shadowy figure rushes by the window. The camera's footage cuts in and out. In the video, someone screams for help, and ultimately it ends with a shot of James with scary, all-black eyes and a disfigured, bloody face. The movie then shifts to Anne, who is a reporter at an online news portal. She attended college with James. They were inseparable in college. After graduation, they had only been in touch with each other through occasional emails. She is concerned about her pal's mysterious disappearance. Police suspected that James's friend Rennie had murdered him but couldn't charge him with any crime without a body. Rennie then also mysteriously disappeared a few days after he was questioned by the police. Resolving to find out what happened to her college mate, Anne investigates James's house. She finds swaths of dusty documents and notes on Project MK Ultra. There also was a letter from Friends of Colorado addressed to James. She also discovers a Betamax cassette that contains footage of the MK Ultra experiments. Curious about some of the things found in the house, particularly some information about radio waves, Anne goes to a local expert, Henry Cale. Henry identifies the radio noise from James's video and ascribes it to a known number station. Number stations are shortwave radio stations of unidentified origin that produce artificially generated voices. Using a young female voice, they read out streams of numbers, words, letters, backward music, or encrypted codes. She learns that the bizarre radio broadcast can only be tuned into at a certain time of the night in the Black Rock Desert. It is called the Lonely Traveler Station. James's cabin is not far from the station. Anne asks Henry questions about his past employment as a codebreaker for the National Security Agency, starting in 1963, coincidentally the same year when the Project MK Ultra began and ending in 1979. Henry is not pleased when Anne questions his history with the NSA. Anne then drives out into the desert after dark and is able to pick up the broadcast. As the signal gets stronger, she overhears noise coming from outside her vehicle. She steps out to check the source of noise when a monstrous form appears from the darkness. She flees in fear. Anne discovers that a mention of friends in Colorado in James's notes is related to the counterculture writer Thomas Blackburn. Thomas has a book by the same name, and he signs his letters by the same phrase. He is known for his use of drugs and unpredictable behavior. Anne tries to contact him by phone, but is angrily rebuffed when she mentions Project MK Ultra. Anne then goes to the Betamax cassette retrieved from James's home. The cassette contains video footage of DMT-19 being injected into people and its effects being observed by researchers. It also shows that researchers were extracting DMT-19 from the pineal gland of a female corpse, dubbed the primary source. The last 35 minutes of the video are also missing, so Anne sends the cassette to video forensics experts to retrieve it. Anne travels to Blackburn's hometown. She ambushes him at the pub he often visits. She lies about her identity to gain his confidence, and he invites her over to his home for an unforgettable experiment. Anne agrees and goes to his place, where he introduces her to his friend Callie. Callie has a PhD in organic chemistry and makes the DMT-19 which they all plan to take. Anne covertly throws the dose that she was supposed to consume. However, Thomas sees through her ruse and tricks her into taking DMT-19. The night quickly sours as Anne is angry at the deception. Callie begins exhibiting the same behaviors that James did earlier in the film. She starts hearing voices and can feel someone approaching towards them. As Anne tries to console Callie, she too hears some of the bizarre music played by the Phantom Station and goes to investigate, only to be attacked by a strange entity. Callie suddenly exhibits the same black eyes and disfigurement as James did and vomits blood onto the floor. An indeterminate time later, Anne and Thomas awaken to find Callie missing. Sensing that they are no longer safe at Thomas's home, they immediately take his car and bolt. It is revealed that in addition to the base chemical compound, scientists were also adding harvested material from the pineal gland of a female corpse, dubbed the primary source, into their test subjects. The subject had a more severe response when administered with the enhanced DMT-19. In the car, Anne asks Thomas how Callie got the chemical formula of DMT. Thomas doesn't know how. Anne then insists that they must go to Callie's house to get to the bottom of it. Thomas agrees. While on their way there, Anne gets spooked by an apparition in the rearview mirror and the sight of a bleeding Thomas in the back seat, seemingly being overtaken by the entity momentarily. Thomas eventually comes back to his senses and they continue their journey to Callie's house. Thomas suspects that the DMT-19 doesn't cause hallucinations, but instead works as a radio antenna of sorts. It allows otherworldly entities to broadcast signals to the people on the drug and take over their bodies and minds. The more people take the drug, the more hosts are created for the entities to take over. The more it spreads. Going through Callie's basement laboratory, Annie comes across research on DMT and a map of the Black Rock Desert with Chamber 5 circled. She also finds a recording of the broadcast from the desert on her laptop. Charlie had jotted down the exact code from the broadcast on a chalkboard and deciphered it. The deciphered code was the formula of DMT. It becomes evident that the combination of streams of numbers and words transmitted by the entities were, in fact, the drug's chemical formula. The US government never came up with DMT. It too perhaps intercepted the similar signals from the otherworldly entities. The government then may have used its arsenal of intelligent codebreakers, like Henry Cale, to decipher the signals and recreated the drug. It administered the chemical to humans to test its effect, naively helping the unearthly entities spread without realizing the full implication of their actions. Anne is nearly captured by Callie, who is now controlled by the entity. She manages to escape with Thomas. Given James's cabin's close proximity to the desert maps at Callie's place, Anne realizes that the signal is likely coming from the laboratory that performed the Project MK Ultra experiments, which is in the same desert that the radio broadcast was coming from. Shortly after this revelation, Thomas reveals that he had lied about giving her DMT-19. Knowing that James's friend Rennie disappeared despite not having taken the drug himself, Anne believes that the entity will pursue her regardless. She resolves to put an end to the broadcast once and for all. Once, during the extraction of chemicals from the pineal gland of a female corpse, the doctors observed more activity in its brain than a normal functioning human brain. The female corpse eventually came back to life and attacked one of the doctors. Perhaps that's when the entity took over the secret US government lab in the middle of the desert. It then started operating a radio station out of it to create more human hosts to take over. She and Thomas travel out into the Black Rock Desert. They discover the laboratory in an abandoned fallout shelter. Thomas takes a can of gasoline inside the lab so that they may burn whatever they find. Inside, they find beds and chairs where doctors used to experiment on people. For some reason, Thomas seems to know a lot about the chairs. They then discover a room full of radio broadcasting equipment and a large tank. Upon inspecting a small porthole built into the side of the mysterious tank, Anne is frightened by a live pale figure with black eyes residing within, looking back at her. This pale figure is presumably the female corpse from whom DMT was being extracted by doctors, and during one such process, she came back to life and attacked the doctors. She is the primary source. At this point, the radio equipment suddenly comes to life and begins broadcasting the spooky signals. Thomas realizes that the entity wanted Anne and him to come to the lab all along. Anne looks for the gasoline Thomas brought with him in the corridor, but is instead greeted by a deformed figure in the dark. Thomas pulls Anne inside the broadcast room and locks them inside. However, soon the entity starts taking over Thomas. He begins to bleed from the eyes and convulse violently. Realizing that the entity might try to harm Anne using his body as a medium, he takes out his gun and shoots himself in the head. The deformed figure outside the room starts banging at the door. A frightened Anne hides in the locker inside the room. The figure eventually breaks in and finds Anne in the locker. Anne screams and bolts outside. It pleads with Anne to come back. She then finds the gasoline in the hall. As she proceeds to pick up the gasoline, she again gets spooked by the figure standing beside her. She runs to the broadcast room with the gasoline. In a frenzy, Anne smashes open the porthole in the tank. She pours the gasoline inside and throws a lighter scavenged from Thomas's corpse. The resulting explosion knocks Anne unconscious. When she becomes conscious, she finds the clothing worn by her friend James before his disappearance lying outside in the hallway. She realizes that the creature chasing her had been James the whole time. The entity had taken over James's body and mind. Anne makes it out of the phantom radio station alive. She is eventually taken into custody by the police for questioning. One of her co-workers travels down to ensure that she is okay. She and Anne discuss the events that have happened so far, including the tape that Anne had discovered earlier in the movie. Part of the tape had been erased but had been retrieved by a video forensics company. Anne then muses that she can't understand why James's friend disappeared, as he had never taken the drug. She begins to hear the phantom broadcast issuing from the room's intercom. She suddenly realizes that the effects of the drug can be passed along by human touch, as she still saw the creatures despite never having taken the drug. She then turns to discover that her coworker, whose hand she held moments before, has been taken over by the entities. The film then cuts to the recovered footage on the tape, which reveals that a college-aged Thomas Blackburn was one of the people who had taken part in Project MKUltra as a test subject. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like the video if you enjoyed it and subscribe to our channel to see more of these movie summaries.